1 year ago, my daughter forced me out of my own home, pressing a $20 bill into my hand as if that was enough to rebuild a life. Since then, silence and lies have filled the space where family should have been. Now, out of nowhere, she is called, begging to live in my $1 million home. I knew right away this wasn't about love or forgiveness. It was about money. And this time, I was prepared to teach her a lesson she would never forget. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own child cast you aside with $20 and then came crawling back a year later asking to live in your $1 million house? The phone rang just after dusk, its piercing sound cutting through the stillness of my study. I froze, the glass of whiskey in my hand halfway to my lips, and turned toward the glowing screen on the desk. Her name appeared, bright and unmistakable. Kayla, my daughter. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it. It had been over a year since she had last spoken to me. More than a year since the night she shoved me out of my own house with nothing more than a $20 bill pressed into my palm. My first instinct was to ignore the call, to let it slip into the abyss where her silence had lived for 12 months. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. I wanted to hear her voice. I wanted to know what she could possibly want from me now. The rain outside streaked the tall glass windows, blurring the Portland skyline into watery colors that pulsed with city light. My home office smelled of leather and polished wood, every surface a reminder of how far I had come since the night I was betrayed. The mahogany desk gleamed under the warm glow of a banker's lamp. Property files lay spread across it, evidence of the empire I had built from nothing. All of it was mine, hard-won through sleepless nights and work that most men half my age would never endure. My thumb hovered over the phone. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then answered. "Hello, Kayla." The line went quiet for a breath. Then her voice poured through the receiver. It was soft, practiced, layered with the same sugar-coated tone she had always used when she wanted something. "Dad, it is me. I have missed you so much." Missed me. The words should have warmed me, but instead they triggered the memory of her eyes on that night, hard and cold as she stood at the front door. I saw her again as she had been, a 29-year-old woman who looked at me like a stranger, holding her overnight bag in one hand, her mother Denise watching from the couch beside Martin, the man who had replaced me before the ink on our marriage had even dried. Kayla had pushed a $20 bill into my palm with no more ceremony than if she had been tipping a valet. "Here," she had said flatly, "for gas. Mom says you need to leave." Those words had branded themselves into me. A father cast out like an intruder in his own house, discarded by the very daughter he had worked his whole life to provide for. Now that same daughter's voice reached for me across the line. "I was hoping," she said carefully, "that you would come to dinner this weekend. We are all getting together. It would mean so much to me. To us." I leaned back in my chair, leather creaking softly under my shoulders. My eyes landed on a silver frame resting between property documents. The last photograph of us as a family. Kayla, in her late 20s, all bright smiles and carefully styled hair. Denise beside her, her smile practiced to perfection, already masking the betrayal she was orchestrating. And me, arm around them both, proud, blind, and unaware of what was coming. I turned the frame face down. "Dinner," I repeated slowly. "Yes," she rushed on. "Mom is making roast just like you used to love. We can talk, maybe start fresh." Her voice cracked at the edges, like an actress struggling to hold a line she did not believe. Start fresh, as if the past year had never happened, as if the sting of that $20 bill had vanished from my memory. "You seem to forget," I said quietly, "that 1 year ago you stood at the door and told me I was worthless. You pressed money into my hand as though I were a beggar. And now you call, inviting me to dinner." There was silence. Only her uneven breathing filled the line. I thought she might hang up, but then she whispered, "Dad, it was not like that. I was upset. We all were. Things are different now. Cannot a daughter just want to see her father?" Her lie was almost insulting in its simplicity. I knew better. In 12 months, I had built a life from the ruins they left me. I had risen from a cheap motel with stained carpets and humming neon lights to this $1 million house where I now sat, my glass of whiskey heavy in my hand. I had turned despair into opportunity, weakness into strength. And now, suddenly, Kayla wanted to see me again. "What is really going on, Kayla?" I asked. Her tone shifted, and for the first time, a thread of desperation revealed itself. "It is just, we need you. I need you. Please, come, Saturday, 6 o'clock, at the house." The house? She spoke of it as though it had never been mine. Denise and Martin's house now, Kayla's house when it suited her. The very place from which they had expelled me. The place where my 28 years of marriage had ended with a shrug and a door closing behind me. I let the silence stretch, staring through the rain-streaked glass at the glowing towers beyond. I could almost hear my instincts speaking, and they were not whispering. They told me this was not about reconciliation. This was about money. About the life I had carved out without them, the life that now gleamed too brightly for them to ignore. 6 o'clock, I said finally. The relief in her voice was immediate and almost pitiful. "Thank you, Dad. That means so much. We will all be there. I said I will be there." My voice was calm, clipped, controlled. I pressed the button and ended the call. The sharp click of disconnection echoed in the stillness of the room. I sat in the silence for a long time, staring at the face-down photograph on my desk, the ghosts of my former life sealed inside its frame. I rose at last and walked through the house. The marble floors reflected the light from recessed fixtures. The gourmet kitchen stood ready, its steel appliances gleaming. Every detail, from the Italian countertops to the view over the city, testified to my resurrection. I had been broken, but I was not broken anymore. And as I moved from room to room, one thought crystallized until it was solid as stone. Dinner would not be about reunion. It would not be about forgiveness. It would be about teaching them exactly what it meant to betray me. I remember the night it happened with a clarity that still makes my stomach tighten. It was a warm evening in late spring, the kind where the air feels heavy and close. I had come home from work, tired but relieved that another long day was behind me. The house in Salem had been my anchor for almost 3 decades, a place I thought would outlast every storm. I stepped through the door expecting to find familiarity, but instead I walked into a scene that stripped away the life I had believed in. Suitcases lined the wall by the front door. My wife, Denise, sat on the living room couch with her phone in her hand, her legs crossed neatly as if she were waiting for company. And she was. Sitting next to her was Martin, a man I had never seen before. Tall, graying at the temples, with the smug composure of someone who had already claimed what was mine. He sat in my place on the couch, the spot where I had read the newspaper every evening for 28 years, and he leaned back like he owned it. "What is this?" I asked, my voice thick in my throat. Denise did not look up from her phone. She spoke with the same casual tone she would have used to dismiss a telemarketer. "Martin is moving in. You need to leave." The words landed like a slap. 28 years of marriage undone in a single sentence. No explanation, no attempt at kindness. Just cold dismissal. Before I could respond, Kayla emerged from the hallway, a bag slung over her shoulder. She had dressed for leaving, jeans and sneakers, her hair tied back like she was heading out on a casual trip. But the look in her eyes stopped me cold. I had expected to see hesitation, maybe conflict. Instead, I saw calculation, a decision already made. "Kayla," I said, searching her face for any sign of the daughter I had raised. "What is going on here?" She looked at me with an expression that was disturbingly steady, like a judge reading a sentence. "You are a failure, Dad. Mom is right. You do not belong here anymore." Her words hollowed me out. My daughter, my only child, the girl I had carried on my shoulders through county fairs, the one I had driven to every school recital and waited outside college exams, now told me I was worthless. She stepped closer and pressed a crisp bill into my hand. A $20 note, probably fresh from an ATM, still stiff at the edges. "For gas," she said, her voice flat, almost clinical, as if she believed she was being generous. The weight of that bill in my palm was heavier than any burden I had ever carried. I looked at it, then at her, and for the first time in my life, I could not recognize my own daughter. The living room, once filled with family photographs and the clutter of everyday life, suddenly felt like a stage where I had been replaced without warning. "Kayla," I whispered, desperate for some trace of hesitation. "Do you understand what you are doing?" She tightened her grip on her bag and said nothing. Denise finally looked up from her phone and gestured toward the door. "You need to go. Now." I turned and walked out, the 20 still burning against my skin. The slam of the door behind me echoed in my ears as I stood on the porch staring at the house I had bought, the house I had paid for with years of labor and sacrifice, now sealed shut against me. I drove without knowing where I was going, the $20 bill tossed on the passenger seat as if it mocked me with every mile. By the time night fell, I found myself pulling into the cracked asphalt lot of a roadside motel on the outskirts of town. The neon sign buzzed, casting a sickly red glow across the wet pavement. Inside, the room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale air. The carpet was worn thin, the curtains stained with the shadow of smoke. I set my bag down on the lumpy bed and sat in the silence, the $20 bill still clenched in my hand. My entire life had collapsed into that single moment. I had lost my home, my marriage, and my daughter in less than an hour. The first night I barely slept. The hum of the highway seeped through the thin walls, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kayla's face, cold and unyielding. I replayed her words again and again. "You are a failure, Dad. Mom is right. You do not belong here anymore." Each time I heard them, something inside me twisted tighter. Days blurred into weeks. I worked whatever jobs I could find. Construction cleanup, dishwashing at a diner, hauling debris from demolition sites. My hands blistered, my back ached. But the pain was a kind of anchor. It reminded me I was still alive, even if barely. I paid the weekly rate at the motel. Cheaper that way, the desk clerk said, though each payment felt like another chain locking me into failure. Meals became instant noodles. Coffee came from a machine in the motel lobby. And my only company was the muffled sound of televisions bleeding through the walls from neighboring rooms. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how 28 years of loyalty and labor could be erased so easily. Wondering how my own daughter could cast me out with nothing more than a $20 bill. But in that darkness, something else began to stir. Anger, yes, but also determination. I told myself that if they believed I was worthless, I would prove them wrong. I would build something so strong, so undeniable, that they would choke on their own words. One evening, after another long shift of hauling broken drywall and sweeping plaster dust, I stopped by the gas station to buy a paper. I sat on the bed, the neon light bleeding through the thin curtains, and unfolded the classifieds. Most ads were forgettable: used cars, second-hand furniture, odd job postings. But one small listing caught my eye. A foreclosure property, a decaying duplex on the edge of town, the price so low it looked like a misprint. Most people would have dismissed it instantly. But I stared at the ad for a long time, the numbers running through my mind. Something about it whispered opportunity. And in that moment, for the first time since Kayla shoved me out of my own house, I felt a spark. That spark stayed with me as I carried on through those weeks of grinding survival. Every morning, I woke before the sun, washed the motel's industrial scent off my skin, and went wherever day labor could be found. Some days it was washing dishes at a downtown diner, my hands raw from hot water and cheap soap. Other days I hauled scrap metal, stacked bricks, or swept up plaster dust at construction sites. The work was thankless, and the pay barely enough to cover my room and a few cheap meals. But I took whatever shifts came because survival was all I had. At night, I returned to the motel with muscles aching and pockets lighter than they had ever been. Dinner was usually instant noodles or a hot dog from the gas station. Coffee came from a machine in the lobby, bitter and weak. But it was enough to keep me going. I stared at the classifieds whenever I had a moment, eyes always drifting back to that foreclosure listing. The number beside it seemed almost unreal. $39,000 for a duplex most people considered unsalvageable. To anyone else, it was a pile of rotting wood. To me, it was a chance. The settlement from my divorce had left me with just over $15,000. It was not much, but it was all I had. I visited the bank and convinced them to lend me the rest with the property itself as collateral. The loan officer gave me a look that bordered on pity, but he signed the papers. I walked out of that office with a mixture of fear and determination burning in me. If I failed, I would not only remain broke, I would sink deeper than before. But if I succeeded, I could carve out something that was mine again. The first time I unlocked the door to that duplex, I almost questioned my sanity. The smell of mildew hit me before I even stepped inside. Broken glass crunched under my boots. The ceiling sagged where rainwater had leaked for months. Rodents had chewed through the wiring. The walls were stained, the floors warped. I stood in the middle of that ruin and felt despair creep at the edges of my resolve. But then I thought of Kayla's face the night she called me a failure, and the despair turned into fuel. I spent the first night sleeping on an old mattress I dragged into the least damaged room, wrapped in a sleeping bag against the drafts that slipped through cracked window frames. During the day, I worked odd jobs for cash to keep food in my stomach. At night, I turned to the house. With a hammer, a crowbar, and more stubbornness than skill, I began tearing out rot and stripping walls down to the studs. My hands blistered and bled. My back screamed every morning. But little by little, progress appeared. YouTube videos became my teachers. I watched tutorials on plumbing until 2 a.m, then tried my hand at replacing corroded pipes the next day. I borrowed books from the library about electrical wiring, marking pages with sticky notes, then climbed into crawl spaces with a flashlight clenched between my teeth. Some days the work went well. Other days, I made mistakes that set me back hours. Once, I wired a breaker wrong and plunged the whole street into darkness. Another time, a pipe joint burst and sprayed icy water all over the room I had just finished painting. I cursed until my throat was raw, then dried everything out and started again. The exhaustion was constant. My body carried bruises on top of blisters, and every night I fell into my sleeping bag, wondering if I was building something or just breaking myself further. There were moments when quitting tempted me. But quitting meant proving Kayla right. Quitting meant remaining the failure she claimed I was, and I refused to give her that satisfaction. As weeks turned into months, the house began to change. The mildew smell faded as I replaced drywall and laid new flooring. Fresh paint covered the stains of neglect. New cabinets filled the kitchen, the appliances bought secondhand, but gleaming after I scrubbed them until my knuckles cracked. The duplex began to look less like a ruin and more like a place where someone could live. It was not perfect, but it was livable, and that was more than I had expected to accomplish. The day the property agent came to see it, my heart pounded like it had when I had signed the loan papers. He walked through each room, his eyes scanning the walls, the floors, the fixtures. He asked questions about the wiring, the plumbing, the repairs. I answered with the confidence of someone who had lived every nail and screw. When he was done, he nodded once. "You did good work here. I can find you a buyer." 2 weeks later, the papers were signed. The duplex sold for $65,000. After paying off the loan and expenses, I cleared over $20,000 in profit. I held the check in my hand, the ink still fresh, and felt a wave of something I had not known in months. Power. Proof. For the first time since being shoved out with $20, I had more than survival. I had a victory. That night, I sat at the motel desk with the check beside me and the classifieds open again. My hands still ached, my shoulders throbbed, but I no longer felt beaten. I felt something else entirely. For the first time since they had called me a failure, I knew with absolute certainty that I could fight back. The sale of that first duplex gave me more than money. It gave me proof that I was not broken. I deposited the check and stared at the balance, the numbers sitting there like a challenge. Most men might have taken a breath, maybe rested after months of exhaustion. I did not. The very next morning, I was combing the classifieds again, hunting for another forgotten wreck that no one else believed in. The second house I found was even worse than the first. It sagged against itself, its porch collapsing, its roof buckling. Neighbors shook their heads and called it a hazard. I walked through the rooms with a flashlight, kicking aside beer cans and broken glass, and saw past the decay. Beneath the filth and rot, the bones were strong. I bought it for $42,000, lived in it while I worked on it, and sold it 3 months later for almost double the price. Another profit in my pocket. Another step away from the $20 humiliation that had started it all. From that moment, I was unstoppable. One property became two. Two became four. Every profit went back into the next purchase. Every lesson learned on one site was applied to the next. I no longer saw broken houses as burdens. I saw them as puzzles, each one daring me to solve it. I spent nights on scaffolding with the glow of work lamps on my back, patching roofs until my arms trembled. I laid tile until my knees went numb, sanded floors until my palms bled. The labor would have broken a weaker man, but to me, it was fuel. With every swing of the hammer, I built not just walls, but a future. By the end of the year, I had flipped 6 houses. By the second year, I had moved into small-scale apartment renovations. My name began circulating quietly in certain circles. Realtors knew me as the man who saw opportunity where others saw ruin. Contractors who once smirked at my inexperience now returned my calls promptly. The bank manager who had once signed my loan papers with pity now shook my hand with respect. I left the motel behind and rented a modest apartment. For the first time in months, I had space that smelled of clean paint rather than mildew, a bed with real sheets, and the quiet pride of progress. But even as I rested on that mattress, I kept working, my eyes always on the next property. Every deal fed the next, and with each step my confidence grew. By the third year, I was no longer the man begging for day labor. I was the man signing contracts. The profits were larger now, 6 figures instead of 5. I hired crews when the work was too big for one pair of hands. But I never sat back idly. I worked alongside them, hammer in hand, sweat soaking through my shirt, because I knew exactly what it had taken to climb here, and I would never forget it. And then came the house. My house. The one that stood on the western slope of Portland, looking out over the city like a sentinel. A $1 million home with walls of glass that caught the sunset, a kitchen lined with marble, a study filled with leather and light. I walked through it the first time with the realtor trailing at my heels, and I felt a deep silence settle inside me. This was not just a house. It was proof. Proof that I had been right to keep going. Proof that I had risen from the cheap motel with nothing but anger and $20 in my pocket. The day I signed the papers, I stood in the foyer and let my hand rest on the polished stone. I thought of Kayla's voice telling me I was a failure. I thought of Denise's cold dismissal. And I smiled, not because I wanted to show them yet, but because I finally knew who I was without them. Life changed quickly after that. My name carried weight in real estate offices. My phone buzzed with contractors and investors. Old acquaintances who had once avoided me suddenly wanted to meet for lunch, their voices full of curiosity and envy. Word spread in quiet whispers that I had rebuilt myself into something they had never expected. Some congratulated me, others resented me, but all of them talked. And talk has a way of traveling. It was late one evening when I sat in my study reviewing property portfolios spread across my desk. The rain tapped against the windows, the city glowing beneath me. My glass of whiskey caught the lamplight, warm amber against the dark. I reached for my phone to check messages, and there it was. A name I had not seen in over a year. Kayla. Her name glowed on the screen, bright and uninvited, carrying with it every memory of betrayal. I stared at it for a long moment, the whiskey glass poised in my hand. I could almost hear her voice in my head, the cold certainty from that night when she shoved $20 into my palm and told me I was nothing. Now she was calling again, after a year of silence. I answered, my voice calm even. "Hello, Kayla." There was a pause. Then her tone emerged, dripping with a kind of sweetness that was almost too sweet, like fruit gone soft. "Dad, I am so glad you picked up. I have missed you." Those words might have touched me once. Not anymore. I leaned back in my chair and let her speak, her voice trembling in all the right places, as if she had rehearsed the role of a caring daughter. She talked about wanting to see me, wanting to reconnect, wanting us to be a family again. The performance was polished, but I knew better. I decided, in that moment, to test her, to strip away the mask she wore and see what truly lay beneath. "Kayla," I said slowly, "I have to tell you something before we meet. Things are not good for me right now. The market turned against me. I have lost almost everything. There was silence on the line. Long, heavy silence. I counted the seconds in my head. 5, 10, 15. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, cautious. What do you mean? I said, letting a sigh drag through the phone. I am meeting with bankruptcy lawyers. My accounts are nearly empty. The houses I bought are under foreclosure notices. I may have to leave my home. The truth was the exact opposite. My accounts were flush, my investments solid, my home entirely paid for. But I wanted to see her reaction when she believed I had nothing left to give. Dad, she said slowly, are you saying you have no money? Not much more than when you last saw me, I replied, twisting the knife. I should have been more careful. I should have listened to people. I got reckless. Her breath changed. It was not worry. It was not sympathy. It was calculation. I could hear the shift in her tone as if she had removed one mask and replaced it with another. Well, then maybe it is best if you do not come to dinner this weekend, she said at last. The words cut clean, quick, without hesitation. I closed my eyes and listened, the phone pressed to my ear. She continued, her voice sharper now, stripped of its earlier sweetness. What is the point if you cannot help? Mom and Martin have a lot going on. This is not the right time for more problems. The dismissal was absolute. Not a trace of affection. Not a trace of care for the father she claimed she had missed. Just a swift cutting away, the same way she had cut me out 1 year ago. Thank you for being honest, I said softly, though inside my stomach had turned to iron. I understand completely. I ended the call and set the phone down, the screen dark in my hand. My heart was steady, too steady. I had suspected the truth, but now I had proof. Kayla cared only for money. She had no interest in reconciliation, no desire for family. It was about wealth, about what she thought she could gain. And the moment she believed that wealth was gone, she discarded me again. But this time, I was prepared. On my desk sat a small black recorder, a habit I had developed during property negotiations. I pressed the button and replayed the conversation. Her words filled the room, cold and dismissive, cutting away the final threads of illusion. The recording captured it all. Her calculation, her lack of sympathy, her swift rejection once she thought my fortune was gone. Perfect evidence. Preserved and undeniable. I leaned back in my chair, the recorder still humming in my hand. In that moment, I felt no sadness, no grief. Only clarity. Kayla had chosen who she was. She was not my daughter in the way I had once believed. She was a woman who measured relationships in dollars and discarded them when the balance fell too low. The rain outside softened, a slow drizzle against the glass, and the city lights blurred into streaks across the windows. I sat there, staring out at the skyline, and made a decision. If Kayla and her mother saw me only as a source of money, then it was time to look into the lives they had built without me. Time to uncover what they had been doing all this time, while I had been clawing my way back from nothing. I reached for my phone again, but not to call Kayla. Instead, I scrolled to a name I had kept in reserve, a contact I never thought I would use. Marcus Reed, former federal investigator turned private consultant. His reputation was solid, his work discreet. If there were secrets in Kayla's and Denise's lives, he would find them. I pressed the number and waited as the line began to ring. Marcus Reed answered on the second ring, his voice clipped and professional. He did not waste words on small talk, and I respected that. Reed Consulting. Marcus, I said, steadying my tone. This is Harlan Voss. We met once at a real estate seminar in Seattle. You mentioned that you handle financial investigations. There was a pause, then a rustle of paper. I remember. You are involved in property investment, yes? What do you need? I need background work, I replied, leaning forward in my chair. Discreet, thorough, on 2 people. My daughter Kayla and my ex-wife Denise. Both have come back into my life suddenly, and I have reason to believe they are not being honest about their circumstances. He did not ask for sentiment. He did not probe for my story. That was another reason I chose him. Names, dates of birth, addresses? I had them ready in a folder, along with every detail I could gather. How soon can you begin? 1 week for a full report, he said without hesitation. Fee is $5,000, expenses included. If there is deception, I will find it. Do it, I said, and the call ended. The following days passed slowly, though my business life carried on with the usual rush. I signed contracts, oversaw construction, and managed investments. But beneath it all, anticipation hummed like a low current. I wanted to know what Kayla and Denise had been doing since they cast me out. I wanted to know what their lives looked like without me. When Reed finally called, his tone carried no judgment, only facts. Mr. Voss, I have preliminary findings. Your daughter has been running an online retail business. The business name is Lux Essentials. At first glance, it appears successful. Sales of lifestyle products, home decor, small luxury items. But dig deeper, and the truth is less flattering. He met me in person at his office, a corner suite in a glass tower overlooking the bay. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were screenshots, bank statements, and customer complaints. Kayla had collected over $150,000 in sales across several months. The problem was, she had shipped almost nothing. Page after page showed money taken, promises made, but no products delivered. This is fraud, Reed said calmly, tapping the papers. It is systematic. Customers are beginning to discuss collective action, but so far they are disorganized. If they unite, she faces civil and possibly criminal charges. I flipped through the pages, each one heavier than the last. Kayla, my daughter, had turned herself into a con artist, preying on strangers with fabricated promises. She had taken people's hard-earned money and pocketed it, dismissing their complaints like they were noise. And Denise? I asked, bracing myself. Reed opened a second folder, this one even thicker. Your ex-wife has presented herself on social media as chronically ill. She has raised money online for supposed treatments and expenses. Medical records show no such illness. No diagnosis, no treatments, no prescriptions. The donations total over $200,000. The words hung in the air like a stench. Denise had always been theatrical. But to invent illness for sympathy and profit? To take money from kind strangers who believed her lies? It was worse than I expected, but not entirely surprising. Both women, Reed continued, have left a trail of evidence. Screenshots, payment records, tax discrepancies. Your ex-wife has not declared a single cent of the donation income to the IRS. If exposed, she faces significant penalties. Your daughter, on the other hand, risks legal action from customers and potentially felony charges. I sat back, my hands spread across the folders. For years they had convinced themselves that I was the failure. They had mocked me, discarded me, and built their new lives without me. Yet here it was, in black and white. Their empire was not built on loyalty or love or honest work. It was built on fraud. "Excellent work," I said, standing. "Send me your final invoice." When I returned home, I spread the evidence across my desk like battle plans. The pages covered the polished wood. Screenshots of Lux Essentials, customer complaints screaming of theft, medical records contradicting Denise's every online post, spreadsheets of unreported income. It was all there, every lie, every theft, documented and undeniable. I poured a glass of whiskey and studied the papers. I did not feel joy. I did not feel sorrow. What I felt was resolve. They had chosen their path, and I would show them what it meant to live with consequences. The plan came together over the next several days. First, I reached out to a journalist I trusted. Jessica Chen, an investigative reporter with the Portland Tribune, had built her career exposing social media scams. I arranged a quiet meeting in a downtown cafe and slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were Denise's medical records, screenshots of her fundraising campaigns, and spreadsheets of donations. She opened the file, her eyes narrowing as she read. If this is true, she has stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars under false pretenses. This will cause outrage. It is true, I said simply. Every record is verified. Jessica nodded, closing the file. If we publish, it will go viral. Her account will be shut down, and she will face not only public humiliation, but likely investigation. That is the idea, I replied. Next, I contacted the IRS. I did not disguise myself. I presented the evidence as a concerned citizen with access to public information and legitimate documentation. They took it seriously, especially the unreported donation income. Investigators would begin their work quietly, but once Denise's records were examined, the penalties would come. As for Kayla, her victims were already halfway to uniting. All they needed was a push. I compiled a list of names and contacts from Reed's files and began calling. At first there was skepticism, then interest, then anger. A woman who had lost $5,000 on furniture that never arrived. A man whose wife had saved for months for a luxury item that never existed. Dozens of people, each carrying the weight of betrayal. They were ready for justice. By Friday evening, everything was in motion. Jessica's article was scheduled to publish on Saturday at 8 o'clock sharp. The IRS had already flagged Denise's accounts for review. Kayla's victims had begun preparing a collective lawsuit with the help of my attorney friend, Merritt. The timing could not have been better, because Saturday was also the night Kayla had invited me to dinner. I walked through my house late that night, the city lights glinting off the glass walls, and thought about what awaited them. They had expected me to come back as a broken man, begging for scraps of family, grateful for their false smiles. Instead, I would walk into their home carrying something they could not imagine. Not gifts, not forgiveness, but consequences. On the table near the door sat a box I had prepared. Wrapped elegantly in silver paper with a black ribbon, it looked like a gift. But inside it was empty. It was a symbol, a perfect reflection of their promises. Shiny on the outside, hollow within. On Saturday evening, I would carry that box into their house. And when the night ended, they would understand what it meant to betray me. The drive down to Salem felt different this time. I had made that trip countless times before. Back when the house had still been mine, back when I thought family was unshakable. Now I drove not as a husband or a father seeking belonging, but as a man prepared to deliver a reckoning. The wrapped box sat on the passenger seat, silver paper catching the glow of the dashboard lights. I glanced at it once in a while, not because I needed reassurance, but because it steadied me. It reminded me of the plan, of the reason I was walking willingly into their home again. I pulled into the driveway at exactly 7 o'clock. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Warm light spilled from the dining room window, flickering against the glass like an invitation to comfort. But I knew better. I had learned long ago that what glowed on the surface could be rotten at the core. Denise opened the door before I even rang the bell. Her smile was too wide, too rehearsed, as though she had been practicing in front of the mirror. She wore a necklace that sparkled a little too brightly, no doubt funded by donations from strangers who believed her fabricated illnesses. "Harlan?" she said, her voice rising with false enthusiasm. "You look wonderful. Success suits you." "Good to be back," I replied evenly, stepping past her into the foyer. The air smelled of roast beef and candles, designed to evoke nostalgia. But to me, it smelled like manipulation. I set the box down on a side table, the black ribbon tied neatly. Denise's eyes darted to it. "You brought something." "A surprise," I said. "But good things come to those who wait." The dining room was set with her best china, polished so thoroughly it reflected the candlelight. Kayla appeared from the kitchen, smoothing her dress with nervous hands. She looked thinner, her eyes lined with something harder than before. She crossed the room quickly and embraced me. Her hug was stiff, calculated, an act rather than a gesture. "Dad," she whispered, "I am so glad you came. This means the world to me." I said nothing, only gave a small nod. Across the room, Martin stood awkwardly near the television, dressed in a suit that seemed to make him uncomfortable. He gave me a quick nod of acknowledgement, clearly trying to play the part of supportive husband. His unease hung heavy in the air. Dinner began with strained pleasantries. Denise played the role of gracious hostess, pouring wine and dishing out portions as if we were one happy family. Kayla asked polite questions about business, her smile carefully held in place. I responded with just enough civility to keep the charade moving, though my mind was fixed on the clock. At precisely 7:25, Kayla began her pitch. "Dad," she said, setting down her glass, "we were thinking that since you have had such success with investments, maybe we could do something together. A family partnership. It could be wonderful for all of us." "Family is everything," Denise added smoothly, reaching across the table to rest her hand near mine. "We should be there for each other." I glanced at the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked steadily toward the half hour. I smiled faintly, letting them think I was considering their words. "Success does suit you too, Kayla," I said. "You look like someone who has everything figured out." Her cheeks flushed with pride at the compliment, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of hunger. "It is not really alone," she explained quickly. "More like a partnership between father and daughter. With $200,000, I could solve some short-term issues and position us for incredible returns." "200,000, I repeated, my tone thoughtful. The second hand reached the mark. The doorbell rang. Kayla froze mid-sentence, confusion flashing across her face. "Were you expecting someone?" she asked, her voice tight. "How unexpected," I murmured, struggling to hide the satisfaction in my chest. She rose reluctantly and walked to the foyer. Through the dining room doorway, I watched her open the door to a man in a business suit holding a stack of papers. His voice carried clearly into the dining room. "Are you Kayla Voss?" "Yes," she said cautiously. "You have been served," the man replied, handing her the documents. "This is a class action lawsuit filed on behalf of multiple customers regarding fraudulent business practices." The color drained from Kayla's face instantly. "There must be some mistake," she stammered, clutching the papers in trembling hands. Ma'am, the process server said calmly. The documents detail the claims. Please sign here acknowledging receipt. This is ridiculous. Denise called from the dining room, her voice sharp. We are in the middle of a family dinner. But Kayla's hands shook as she flipped through the pages, her eyes widening with each line. 150,000? I do not have that kind of money. She whispered, her voice breaking. Denise pushed back her chair and hurried to Kayla's side. Do not worry, we can fix this. With Harlan's resources, we will hire the best lawyers. It is just a misunderstanding. I remained seated, watching them with calm detachment, the way a conductor might watch a symphony unfold. Kayla clutched the lawsuit, Denise already reaching for her phone. I know an attorney through Instagram, she muttered. He specializes in these cases. A few calls, and this will be over. Before she could dial, her screen lit up with a storm of notifications. Her expression shifted from confidence to confusion as thousands of comments and messages flooded in faster than she could scroll. Her face drained of color. What is this? She whispered. Why are people calling me a fraud? She scrolled furiously, her hands shaking. Someone posted an article. Local influencer's fake illness exposed. They have my medical records. They are saying I stole money from patients. This is a lie. All lies. Martin moved closer, reading over her shoulder, his face tight with disbelief. Denise, what is this? You told me. They are making it up, Denise cried, but her voice had lost its strength. She kept scrolling, desperately trying to delete comments that multiplied faster than she could tap. The room was chaos now. Kayla clutching the lawsuit papers, pale and shaking. Denise overwhelmed by the online avalanche, her carefully constructed life collapsing with every notification. Martin standing frozen, realization dawning that the woman beside him had deceived not just strangers, but him as well. I rose from my chair slowly, straightening my jacket. The gift box sat on the side table, untouched, gleaming in its silver wrapping. I picked it up and carried it toward the door. Kayla's eyes darted to me, filled with panic. Dad, did you know about this? I looked at her calmly. I find it fascinating how quickly family loyalty appears when consequences arrive. Denise's voice cracked as she pleaded. Harlan, you cannot just leave. We are family. Help us fix this. At the threshold, I paused, the box heavy in my hand, though empty inside. I turned to face them one last time, my voice low, each word deliberate. 1 year ago, you shoved me out with $20 and called me worthless. Tonight, you learn what that was really worth. I closed the door behind me as their world collapsed inside. I carried the silver box to my car and set it gently on the passenger seat. Through the window of the house, I could still see shadows moving frantically, hear muffled voices raised in panic. Kayla clutching lawsuit papers, Denise trying and failing to stop her phone from flooding with hate. Their world was crumbling, and I walked away with the calm certainty of a man who had waited patiently for this moment. The fallout began immediately. The lawsuit against Kayla gathered momentum faster than she could have imagined. The victims of her online fraud, who had once been scattered and helpless, were now united with legal representation. Court hearings began within weeks, and by the time the process had finished, the judgment against her was absolute. $153,000 in restitution, plus court costs. A felony fraud conviction, 3 years of probation, hundreds of hours of community service, and the permanent stain of a criminal record. Her victims received compensation, though it was more symbolic than sufficient. And Kayla's name was dragged through headlines that would follow her for the rest of her life. I watched from a distance as she tried to rebuild, but there was no easy recovery from what she had done. No employer wanted to hire someone with her record. Every application, every interview ended the same way, with doors closed in her face. Community service hours at a homeless shelter taught her what real hardship looked like, a lesson she had never imagined she would need. I wondered sometimes if she thought of me as she scrubbed floors and handed out meals to strangers. I hoped she did. Denise's collapse was different, but no less complete. Jessica Chen's article about her fraudulent medical campaigns spread like wildfire. Within hours of publication, her social media accounts were flooded with outrage. Followers who had once sent her donations turned on her with fury. Screenshots of her supposed diagnoses contrasted against her medical records, proving her deception beyond any defense. By the end of the week, her accounts were banned permanently. Her face appeared on news programs as the prime example of influencer fraud, a cautionary tale played on repeat. The IRS came next. Months of investigation unearthed over $200,000 in unreported income. Penalties and back taxes consumed everything she had left. Properties seized, bank accounts frozen, assets stripped. What remained of her glamorous lifestyle vanished in days. The necklace she had worn at that dinner table was sold at auction alongside the rest of her jewelry. Martin did not last long in the wreckage. Within 3 months, he filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and protecting his own business assets. He had been a willing participant in Denise's betrayal of me, but when the consequences arrived, he was unwilling to drown with her. He left, and she was alone. Last I heard, she was renting a 1-bedroom apartment and working part-time cleaning offices. The woman who once played the perfect hostess in a house I had built now scrubbed someone else's floors for a living. For a while, I kept track of their downfall with the precision of a man measuring justice. Each update brought a sense of completion, another step in a process that had begun the night they cast me out. But eventually, the satisfaction gave way to something else. Peace. I had seen the consequences delivered, not by my hand, but by truth, evidence, and the justice system. Their betrayals had returned to them, multiplied, and I no longer needed to look back. My life moved forward in ways I had never expected. The business continued to grow. New properties, new partnerships, and new opportunities came to me with increasing ease. But more importantly, my life became something more than money and work. On a trip to Yellowstone, I met Rebecca, an attorney with a sharp mind and a clear heart. She was successful in her own right, but more than that, she was honest. Her presence was steady, uncomplicated, and for the first time since the collapse of my marriage, I felt what real companionship could be. We traveled together, walked beaches at sunset, shared mornings without pretense. With her, there were no games, no manipulation, only trust. One evening, as we stood on a Hawaiian beach, watching the Pacific swallow the sun, Rebecca turned to me and said, "You seem lighter here, like you have let something go." I nodded, toes buried in warm sand, the sound of waves rolling steady behind us. "I have learned something important," I said. "Some people earn their place in your life. Others only occupy space until you recognize their true value." She smiled, understanding without the need for more words. I thought about that $20 bill often. For a long time, it had burned in my memory as an insult, a symbol of betrayal. But over time, I realized it was something else entirely. It was the cost of freedom, the price they placed on me when they believed I was worthless. $20 had been their measure of my value, and they were wrong. That small bill had pushed me out of a house filled with lies and sent me into a life where I rebuilt myself from the ground up. It was not an insult. It was the beginning of everything. Today I live surrounded not by people who measure me in dollars, but by those who see me for who I am. My home is filled with peace, not deception. My wealth is built on honesty and work, not lies and fraud. I no longer measure myself by their approval. I measure myself by my own integrity, by the strength I found when I had nothing, and by the choices I made when I refused to quit. Kayla will live with her record, learning each day what it means to pay back what she took. Denise will live with the knowledge that her face became the symbol of shame, her lies permanently exposed. Their betrayals built their own prisons, and I am free of both. All because of $20. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel and tell us your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next one, click on the box on your screen.